Well, hello, hello, friends.
Hello.
Good to see you guys. Nice. At first, I couldn't tell, Brian. That was a very convincing perspective for your background. I thought you were just in a new spot in the house. I like it.
I I worked on it. I took pictures around the house, and this was the only place I could find that was clean enough that looked kind of. Uh,
Nice. And you were working on a green screen last time. Do you have a green screen behind
yeah,
you?
it's not going to be here till mid-May,
Okay.
so
Yes. Oh, shipping delays. Thank you, COVID. Let's see. Nathaniel, are you really in the basement or is this a green screen?
It's a basement. It's my
Nice.
basement. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. You never know these days. I've got my new backdrop here because of May the 4th. I don't know if you guys are Star Wars nerds like I am. I was playing with all kinds of different Star Wars backgrounds, and so that got me into utilizing this one. And then you guys had inspired it too. You guys always have backgrounds going on from the beach and wherever else it might be. And so I thought I would join in, be cool and hip. All right, friends. Well, we get to finish up the last huddle for this module as we look at chapters, I think it's 7 and 8, if I remember the numbers off the top of my head, but where we're looking at history and biography in particular and stance and how all of that plays. It feels like we're gaining some of the traction that we might have been missing in the very beginning. And so I'm looking forward to how this one potentially helps us to put a bow on all of that kind of learning. Before we jump in, let's see if I remember correctly. We've heard from Brian and Claren. We've heard from Lynn. And we haven't heard from Nathaniel. John, did you share in the very beginning your history and biography? Or I have a vague memory that you did.
You mean history of Kitchener-Waterloo? Is that what you're asking, or you mean I'm lost? So
that's right.
I've shared my meme, my life story kind of thing, but I have not shared my community profile.
Perfect. So we've got Nathaniel and John. We'll work through those today. And then there's 2 points as I've been reflecting back on the content from those chapters that I want to try to emphasize and bridge. I want to make sure that we're seeing how history and biography work, which I think has been what we've been gaining traction in, but how it leads to stance, and particularly a stance toward those that are different than us, kind of the Samaritans of that gospel call from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Because usually we're relatively good at ministering to people in our Jerusalem. We're decent at ministering to people who are in our Judea with a slight amount of differences, but it's the Samaria or the Samaritan type of ministry that is usually where we're relatively even blind to it. The differences kind of continue to keep us apart. And I think it's because we don't know their history and we don't know their biography. Usually what I find is that when we know their history and their biography, a compassion wells up in us that allows us to minister to them as known people instead of foreign people. So that's at least kind of the big pitch that I've been reflecting on that I think is critical for us to grab hold of. So since this takes a little while to unpack, let's skip kind of just our general check-in and how things are going, and let's jump straight in. So John, since your mic is on, would you walk us through your history and your biography?
You want to check in, or did I miss the check-in?
Nope,
misunderstood.
We're gonna skip the check-in.
Okay, because we've all talked together today for sure. So good to see you.
Good seeing you.
So I live in Kitchener, and this city is the city of my. Oh, what are you doing?
I'm gonna kind of scribe along as you do all of your speech.
Oh, okay. So I actually grew up in this city. So this is my home, my birth city. So I have all that history. I've moved away a number of times, but I've come back and forth. Kitchen with an ER.
Okay.
And Kitchener is a city. It's a city of I think, almost 400,000 people at this point, and it wasn't always so. And so actually the origins of Kitchener is that it was an initial Mennonite German settlement, Mennonites that came up from Pennsylvania. And my story is interesting because I moved to Pennsylvania to the same Mennonite area where these friends would have come from back in the 1850s, 1860s. They made this migration. And so we wouldn't be called Pennsylvania Dutch like some want us to call us Dutch, because we're not Dutch. We're Pennsylvania German. So that's often pointed out, at least in the area I am. And so we got quite German roots. And essentially it began as the founding of the Mennonite movement right in the city called Ebytown, after a bishop from Pennsylvania. So there are deep roots of Mennoniteness and Germanness actually in the founding of Ebytown, which eventually became called Berlin in 1880.
Wow.
It was known as the German capital of Canada.
Wow.
And so Germans are Germans, right, Claren? Germans are proud people. Germans are industrious people. Germans know what the right way to do things are. So they're German, and they're also Mennonite. And so in many ways, because they're Mennonite, they also have different views initially on worldly things. So when Kitchener or Berlin was formed, they were radically different than the towns that were forming around them. And so they were quite different because they were German, the rest were more British. And so I smile because our greatest rivals in our hockey culture in Kitchener are London and Guelph, who are quite different from us. And it stems way back to the beginning because they're not German and they're not Mennonite. And so it's interesting to see that play out in its origin. Is this too much detail?
Beautiful. How about, I want a little bit more. What are the differences? How did the Mennonite side of it shape it? So I get it that it caused a differentiation from the other people, but how would you characterize it, like what you did with the German side? Proud, right, industrious?
Yeah, so I think that it was rejecting worldly views. And so this whole separation from everything, it was a settlement that deemed themselves as not wanting to be like the others. And so they fought initially what I would call innovation and those things, which now we're known for.
Wow.
Interestingly enough.
That is interesting.
Essentially what happened is World War I, and in 1917, when the World War was on, that was a war against Germany. Canada sided in that war against Germany. And so it was a war against Germanness as well.
Wow.
And so quickly, this area of Germans called Berlin faced this issue that they pressured to change their name. And so they changed it to Kitchener after Lord Kitchener, who was a British warrior general. So here ironically, a split took place, if you read our history, in our identity.
Wow.
And so this somewhat might still exist a bit because there's still German heritage, but here are the name switch, which was forcing us to be more Canadian, that is tolerant and like everybody around us and welcome people around us. So we changed our name to Kitchener in 1917. And with that change, I wrote the word split in the community and its identity.
Yeah.
If you fast forward to the 1960s when I was born, it was common in Canada to start accepting your cultural heritage roots. And so that's when we re-embraced our Germanness, not necessarily our Mennoniteness. So it's funny to think about this coming back up again. And so we are known today for our most famous celebration called Oktoberfest in Kitchener. It's a major cultural, long-time, large event. And so again, it's about this back and forth of embracing our Germanness. There are lots of, I guess our roots are still church-oriented. So when you talk about Kitchener and Ebytown, there are lots of churches here. That's the culture around here. Church is accepted, maybe irrelevant, but still it's quite churchy. Right, Clarence?
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of churches, and that's kind of still an origin of who we are. In the growth and development over the years, we've seen we've seen the shift to education. So out of the church came the shift to education, and churches started founding schools and seminaries and university. And now Kitchener and Kitchener-Waterloo, those are twin cities that you really can't tell much difference between. They have twin universities, and we would be known, Kitchener would be known as a strong education university city. With that, with the education side came the German industry side, and I know this place to be known for tires, the manufacture of tires. We used to be called the Akron of Canada. And so tires, footwear, sausage, and beer are very Kitchener. So we have farmers markets, sausage, like it's just, this is our culture that I know of. And so we would have meat producing, we would have industry around those kinds of things that have always been there. In our, the one thing about the university, I'll just let you know, is that it was our universities that spawned the co-op movement for students. And that's now become a well-accepted way of doing university training, is you work some and then you go back to school some and you go back to work some. So we have a very co-op, we think in terms of maybe education and application right at the same time. That's very common around here. The only other thing that I would say that took place, and it's more recent history, Michael, is that we are now a leader in the software innovation industry. So we went from engineering to computer to software tech. And we are the home, we're called BlackBerry Town. We are the home of the origins of BlackBerry phones and so on like that. Wow. BlackBerry and Research in Motion, RIM Park is all part of us. And that was a major boom and industry for us, which now has taken a turn, obviously. You don't really buy a BlackBerry, but BlackBerries and innovation originated here. So now when I drive around, I see industry some, but I see Google, all kinds of software startups all over the place. We're really known for software and innovation at this point, along with education.
That's good.
Maybe that's enough. I could list some people. I could list some other things.
Let's get some, I'd like to fill in a little bit more of the biography. So I felt like I was pulling some biography components out of what you were saying, because oftentimes they're paired that way, you know, German stance, but we're talking about them in general versus particular. Can you unpack a little bit more of the biography side for us?
You meaning people?
Yeah.
Well, I've listed various people who all would have a journey and story. Do you want that much detail?
Yeah, let's try it.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure how far you want to go, but what I found interesting is that when Benjamin Eby moved here to Kitchener, he had been given the land from Indians. So there was a native tract given to him. And he gave a tract to Pennsylvania settlers who were moving up. And it's interesting that I discovered that the first Mennonite church in the city, one of the first churches in the city, was given to a John Gressman, later spelled John Cressman.
Wow.
That first deed of where the first Mennonite church was founded in that place, along with a Joseph Snyder and a Benjamin Eby. And so I even find my roots, well, there's lots of John Cressmans, but that's part of this heritage right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so I actually have relatives in the cemetery, the original cemetery that we're talking about back in the 1880s.
Yep.
I'm not sure that's the biography you want, but that's an example of how this streams somewhat through.
Give us a little bit more, and now that we've got at least some of the connections for the early parts, maybe do you have anything that would like help understand the biography of this, maybe the split in identity or the development of Oktoberfest, or even maybe more of the productivity side of things, and anything that you can add into that?
Well, I don't know actually the linkages, but I do discover a whole bunch of industries that started in the 50s that were anchor industries for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so the linkage between after the war and coming out of there looks like these are people that were settled in the area,
Mm-hmm.
and in turn developed significant industries like Dare Cookies, Electrohome, these different types of industries that really saw us become this factory-oriented industry place. I'd have to do more research on the linkage between the two, but we went, our German heritage tells me we started really getting industrious after the war.
Yep.
And these a lot of our German names surface at this point, doing various, starting various large industries.
Mm-hmm.
And one by one, as they fizzled, it appears like we shifted towards more of this reality of innovation. And the innovation came from the university. So the founder of Mike Lazaridis went to the University of Waterloo, and so you can read his story that then was sort of the permission to keep innovating, and others have followed and mentored from him.
Yep.
Maybe this is all I was sort of able to do while I had the time off.
Love it. No, it's a lot. That's a lot.
A recent more wave of immigration now has also happened in the
Exactly. That's the current reality. When I come to interviewing my neighbors, I have more Samaritans than like-minded people. I started that process, and I discovered the first one, 3 different preliminary conversations. These people all moved here in the last year or two, not from here, not familiar with here, very little linkage to here. They were wanting to learn more from me about here than I was trying to match their stories. That's where my current reality sits at the moment.
Yep, that's good. What was the cause for them to move? Was it because of the software innovation and they're working in software, or are they working in service industry?
A little bit of everything. I found that they were coming because it was either innovation, or it was industry or education. The 3 different ones, they came up. It would make sense. And they all moved from larger places like more Toronto. Michael, you've been to Toronto?
I have not.
Okay, so we're talking mega city to at least a bedroom city that they can drive to, but they were done with the commute and the cost of living. So they've moved to this, what are we, Clarence? I guess we're still a good sized city, but not the Toronto city. And we're not a little city either.
Yeah.
So
Makes sense. They still want all the conveniences of a larger city, but without all of the, with some of the greater headaches that the largest cities bring to us. Makes sense.
and the only other thing that I know about Kitchener is in Toronto, a large city, how should ethnicities, they go into various areas. They seem to group together. And so parts of the city are known by Chinatown or whatever. Not in Kitchener. We are spread wide. There's no clumping. I don't know what the right word is. I don't want, but I see that there's quite overlap all over the place, like quite diversity, like you might see in a university, for example.
I'll just use melting pot to be able to, and I
That's
don't mean
a good word.
that means that they give up, but that is different. And that's been different than my experience of some of the Canadian cities I've been to as well. Wow, that's really cool. One of the things, John, that we talked about last week was this. So I'll use a different color. I'll use green. When you have this move, this large move of immigration, you really do see where a new history will begin for those people, and their biography. Of course, they've got a past biography, but now it will begin helping to shape the community. And again, I think because it's a melting pot, because you're actually in a melting pot living arrangement too. You are in a very community oriented living environment, because I think you're in townhomes or condos. And so you've got all this diversity around you. I think that's a very interesting setup. And I think it's intriguing, John, that they want to know the rooted history that you carry. And that, what an open door right there, where you could greet them and receive them, and they could have an honorable introduction instead of a divisive introduction into the community. Wow, that's really cool.
The only other comment I'll add is, of course, Rob, my next door neighbor, we started this conversation and he's British. So we're got right at it right at the very beginning. So I thought it struck me about stance, because he had some opinions and I'm German. Not that it really came up, but you just understand that, oh, that's interesting. He's got the full accent, the full deal. And so just learning, I haven't dived, I don't know how the other guys did, but I feel like the interview isn't formal. It's a growing informal dialogue that I'm learning bits and pieces. And that's with three different ones of three different cultures.
Yeah. So let's just dig into Rob. I know that you're doing an informal interview. Do you know how long ago he moved to Kitchener?
I do. The same as me. He moved in 2 years ago.
Okay.
And he moved from a place called Milton, which is just outside of our big Toronto. Okay. And they moved because of cost of living and because he's getting ready to retire. Nice. And he was able to buy a houseboat, and he's able to get access to northern country. He feels better from here than from Toronto.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he's a former teacher.
Okay.
And so he's doing a little part-time teaching for one of our colleges.
Makes total
so there's a bit of linkage.
Yeah,
that way.
Because he's going to go to an environment where he's able, he's got an abundance of schools that he could potentially work within. It's a great, just like the immigration move, we're moving to a smaller city that has the amenities that we like without the headaches that we don't miss at all. And he's moving into retirement. He's enjoying kind of this good life, and he sees Kitchener as being able to provide that. Plus it's affordable. So it makes total sense in there. And so maybe what we are missing here would be, and it's tough. You probably can't have the story, of a family member or a friend that is in these early stages. I'm noticing the biographies that you're bringing to the table, where your biography and his comes, are more over here. It would be interesting to see, is there anybody from this season that you could interview and understand? Because I think this is intriguing. That is amazing to think that the Germanness, how did you say that there was a war against Germanness? Totally makes sense. Now, like, stance is coming into play and all of that, but yet how you see this Oktoberfest revival and how all of these things that were proud and right and industrious ended up being a blessing to the storyline of the community, but without the negative side that kind of got surfaced during the World War I. I'm sure World War II had its own impact as well. So I think it'd be interesting to have stories from people that were there at that time frame, if you could find them, and just understand more of that. Because one of the key things we dug into is anybody who's led in change. So somebody had to lead in change to change the mind of the community that Oktoberfest wasn't a a negative version of German celebration. This is the positive side of the culture, and we want to embrace it.
Yeah,
Somebody
lots
had
of
to
beer
handle
helps.
that. Say that again.
Lots of beer helps.
Yeah, I was going to say, there you go. And I love it. Sausage.
Ironically, I've never attended Oktoberfest because I'm Mennonite. So it's the tension in the city between the Mennonite side of some of us and this completely worldly experience colliding together. That does exist.
Wow.
I just Googled it. Oktoberfest started in the year of centennial, 1967, which there was different festivals that started to celebrate our 100th anniversary, and Kitchener came up with the Oktoberfest celebration.
Yeah.
Now that makes sense. Think about the 60s. By then, you're far enough past World War II.
Right.
There's some healing that has taken place, and the centennial spurs on what do we celebrate and in what fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole Canadian cultural movement that was going on at that time.
Okay.
To be more tolerant, to be more embracing. I think that Germans would have a hard time wrestling through that. But I was born in 1961, so all I ever remember was not being on the road for drunk drivers during Oktoberfest. Like,
because of the Mennonite background.
Oh my goodness, it's these two colliding there, and most of our churches are rooted in Germanness and/or this Mennonite reality, and so farmers markets and these things are still a part of our culture, and so on. So, yeah.
But am I right that your churches would position themselves against Oktoberfest because of the alcohol?
Well, it depends. Not our millennial churches.
Historically,
Yeah.
Historically, EMC churches would not have been
Yep.
excited about this event.
So which makes you think, the Jews and the Samaritans would have had their radical differences, and yet in order to reach them, think Acts 15 and on, Gentile community, there were these shifts that they had to embrace for the sake of the mission that meant that they let go of some things that were very precious to them historically and culturally. So that's interesting.
I can eat lots of sausage and sauerkraut, though.
Later, Hosen.
What were some of the key insights? You've shared a few of them, maybe some of the Kairos moments that hit you, John, as you did this research.
Well, again, it was actually good for me just in a Kairos moment to come, like to move back home in my mind and embrace my community again. I think that I've been back here now 6 years. I had moved away. So it was, again, an embracing of where I am. I think that was important for me to say, well, this is my home. It has been my home, and I'm home. And I need to, so I think that was just an important Kairos for me. Because when I read the histories, I was going, oh, I know that. I know there. I know this. I remember that. And so that was really helpful to me from a Kairos perspective. And then I'm just really captivated by your Samaritan comment. I reread the chapters again, and I keep feeling a stronger call to the Samaritans around me.
Yep. Good.
It's not, how should I put this? It's not in my DNA based on what I've just told you.
Wow.
So it's not in my, we just hung out at our church when I, like a girl, like, so the history is to say mono, like we're German, like it's just to be drawn to the Samaritan is not in sort of the way I'm brought up in my culture.
Oh.
And so even when I go around the condo, I'm greeting everyone, no matter what they're wearing or what their ethnicity, and I'm the only one, it feels like. So I just feel like that's an important call for me.
Yeah. That's good. And it kind of costs you something. It costs you something internally. It feels like you're diverting from what you received and inherited, but the calling is coming from a bigger citizenship that you share and a bigger culture, a kingdom culture. But it comes with its own challenges because you're alone in that. But I was just picturing, I know kind of your heart, your perspective from having been with you. And I thought, wow, what a blessing that these people have you in that move. They've been here for a short period of time. In a sense, you could be the person who rolls out the red carpet to receive them as a blessing instead of as a foreigner. And you know that their coming is going to bring change, and it will shift the history of the city. But you can look back and say, we've always gone through shifts as culture things have come about, and we can navigate these next steps well, and we can learn from our mistakes from the past. We don't need another war against anybody. We can embrace these things, and we can be fully Canadian in all of those ways. We can be fully German, and we can be fully Samaritan and have this new norm in Kitchener. I could really see where you're a gatekeeper in that. And that makes sense that it starts here, right? Look at this identity stuff that you're saying. I'm embracing my community. I'm home. I mean, I know some of these are my words. I'm rooted, but then I'm drawn to these people. That looks like a beautiful setup that the Father's got for you. Your church, does your church look largely German Mennonite? What's the demographics of the church that you attend in Kitchener?
Well, I don't attend a church in the city.
Okay.
I pastored a church in the city, and the church I grew up in was one of our churches right in the center of the city. So yes, they would be German rooted,
Mm-hmm.
and they would be Mennonite oriented in many ways.
Okay.
It's funny that the churches in our denomination don't really get along great. They don't interact a whole lot. It's funny to figure out what's Germanness, what's going on there, but it is an interesting dynamic about whether that's related to just the types of people we are and the way we've been. And yeah.
And so it sounds
I would say conservative is certainly another adjective of some of the culture here. That's somewhat German too, of course.
And again, that if I understand from some of the history lessons and cultural lessons of Canada that I've heard, that's a big difference from Toronto. Then Toronto leans much more liberal.
Correct.
Yeah. So that means you're going to get an import of liberal ideas and postures that are going to be difficult for a conservative community to embrace, and could really be the reason why you repel that change. So
our universities have gone very liberal, so there's really a dichotomy there as well.
Yeah, right. They started as Christian conservative, or they were started at least with Christians and had conservative roots. And yeah, you typically see that swing in a matter of decades where they go much more liberal.
That's exactly what's happened.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful.
Just one more thing about the multicultural. Kitchener has a multicultural festival that they hold every year in the park. And it's actually in its 53rd year, which actually goes back again to 1967 when that started.
What?
So that's very interesting. Somehow there was a shift there that began to celebrate the diversity of cultures.
It's healing right here from the 1917 time frame. I'll bet you that's what it is. Somebody recognized we need to embrace this because of this divide, like the way that John said, this split in identity. Wow, 53 years. Do your churches participate in that, or is that what they don't participate in?
We've had a multicultural team there present. I don't know how many years now. handing out Bibles, offering to pray for people.
Yep.
So like there's I don't know how many years that's been going, but that's
Yeah, that's very true.
What's interesting, think about the stance in what you just described and how the churches participate. So they're there, but they're handing out Bibles, which is probably not what the cultural festival is celebrating. And so they're positioning themselves in it, but different, instead of embracing just the multicultural side of it and being one of, there is a difference in how we participate in it. So we're bringing our culture, our church culture, and again, I'm not against witnessing, I'm all for that, but we're going to come to an event and we're going to bring our culture to that event. That probably it's not received. That's what's probably interesting. That's a multicultural angle that's not received as well from the multicultural like champions. Like, don't bring your Bibles here. It's probably like, you know, like, oh, you always bring that stuff and are trying to get us to change our ways. And so interesting.
Yeah, that would be true. That would be an us and them. That's back to Anabaptist thinking a bit too. All those things about they're the world, we need to win them.
Yeah.
And so there would be strong evangelism roots in our churches. Yeah. And when we talk disciple making, that doesn't catch a lot of ground because we've got to win them. Maybe that's normal, but that would be a Kitchener reality I've seen.
Yeah.
So John and Clarence, you should bring your home brew to the Oktoberfest or the Multicultural Festival.
There you go.
Set up a table, home brew and Bible.
Yeah.
You know.
And then you could have a banner of the church, and you could say, "Give us a shot," and give away free shots of beer. I've actually seen a church do that in our town. So, seriously, yeah.
I would be looking for other employment if I did that.
Wow. Well, good. I think again, here's some of the key things I want us to see. The history of a community, of course, will impact the biography of the people because they're living in it. And here's the way I've been playing around with this phrasing. The history will shape the people. So you're going to see that. If you go to a place that has schools, seminaries, and universities, you're going to have college students who come for a short period of time and then leave afterwards, and a few of them will stick around, So it's going to shape the biography of the people that are there. But you're going to have the biography of people who look at problems like this one right here, and they're going to then shape the culture, the story, the history of the environment. And you're going to watch that happening where the history shapes the people, but change agents people shift the history of the environment. And, as we are looking to, understand the place that we live and bring the gospel to the place that we live, we need to understand these components and figure out how has change been communicated in the past so that I can communicate with, I don't have a space to write all of these, but remember the cultural texts. How can I reference the cultural texts so that I am received as an insider and somebody who's favorable toward it? I can understand and speak with the linguistic codes, even though we're German and British. We can kind of laugh and joke about this difference in the back, in the history that we have. What's my other phrase? The audience. I can understand who my audience is. This is a largely German population, or this is the multicultural people, or these are the Oktoberfest people. And I would choose a different way to communicate, and maybe even use different cultural texts and linguistic codes depending upon who the audience is. And then I could bring in other voices that oftentimes carry a lot of weight. And so by utilizing those levers, I could, like we see Paul in Athens do, gain an audience and choose a highly positive stance on many areas, and then choose very strategically to be able to differentiate myself and choose a negative stance and bring challenge for transformation's sake. And again, that's all part of how do we bring about an awakening as we communicate to people where we live. Well, this is some of the study that is the apostolic insight that we need to dig into and apply. All right, anything else before we turn to Nathaniel? Okay, Nathaniel, give it a go. I'm going to erase all this stuff and kind of map through what your history and biography from your research is. All right, I'm ready.
Yep. I'm a local Calgarian. My two neighbors, left and right, and a neighbor at the back, are all immigrants. The four of us are all immigrants. We made some research together, and we were not able to find any concrete research on Calgary because we tried not to go through Google's. We tried to look at the city government informations. We're still working it out. But what we do know is more or less we have around 1 million Calgarians living in Calgary, more or less. And many of them, almost 80%, are immigrants. And so I know very little of the Calgary history, though I know the locations, I know the geography and so forth, but history-wise, very little. But as an immigrant, my target is toward the immigrant.
Yep.
If I'm going to share the gospel, my target people will be more on immigrants. So from immigrant point of view, let me share you my story.
Great.
Before, my two grandparents were all from China. One migrated over to the Philippines, one migrated over to Malaysia. The one towards the Philippines, they both migrated to the different countries right before the communism, wherein the Big Mao, we call it, occupied China. And that was before 1940s. So both of them migrated. They don't know each other. And after the migration, my maternal grandfather became very poor because of the communism. All their properties were being held up by the government. And because of that, he tried to strive hard. As an immigrant, when he moved to the Philippines, he has nothing but just one set of clothing, and he started from there. Not only that, after he and his wife gave birth to their children, he tried to strive hard in such a sense. He has to eat different kind of street foods, uncooked foods, those kind of things. As an immigrant, we do really struggles. Until such time, where in 1940s, during the Second World War, it made everything much more harder because of the Japanese occupation in the Philippines, as well in different Asian countries. After that World War, he said to himself, I need to do something because I have family to feed. And he was an unbeliever at that time. And that time he was looking for something concrete and something what life is all about, especially after the Second World War. And then it so happened that his wife is a very devout Christian. And his wife was telling him about Christ. And that time he accepted Christ after the Japanese occupation in the Philippines. And with a turn, God really blessed him so much. Wherein, moving forward, in the 1950s, when Philippines is still a very strong country that time in Asia, much stronger than any other countries in Asia, he became a very rich person. And with money, he became very proud of himself. But one night, he thought about what money is all about. Because if there's another war or if there's another communist occupation, everything will be right there and there, gone. So when he asked his wife told him, why don't we turn to God and ask God? And it so happened that time in 1950s, there are these American missionaries who came to the Philippines. With these missionaries, they try to spread the good news in the Philippines. And it so happened that there is this Chinese missionary from US who went to the Philippines, came to know the wife. And as they talk, I'm not sure, I should say it's divine intervention
Mm-hmm.
with missionaries' mission-minded mind. Together with his money, they started churches, they started seminaries, they started schools, and even the latest one is they joined force with the Far Eastern Broadcasting Corporation.
Nathaniel, let me make sure and ask a question. So the schools and the seminaries, were they started in the Philippines?
Yep,
Okay, good. I
yep,
just wanted to make sure that I'm on track that way.
yep. So I call him as a starter.
Yeah.
He start so many things. Even right now, if we visit the Philippines, there are so many churches, so many schools. They will say because of this person who helped start all those things. Uh, but one way or the other, the family became a very big business people in the Philippines. Even outsiders will say their dream is to work for the family. But money is money. When the Marcos regime come in, it changes because the Marcos, you may have of the Marcoses.
No, I
They,
haven't.
oh, okay. We call it the President Marcos.
Okay.
President Marcos, I think started sometime in 1960s. He became the president, and he became a very greedy person. He liked to grab big businesses to be his own. So the family decided to break up the business to make it smaller because of President Marcos' regime. So what money is all about? That's the thinking. That's the mindset. As an immigrant, we have to start from the start. But at that time, one of his daughter said, "What money is all about? What life is all about?" Those kind of thinking. And she told her dad, "I think the Lord is calling me to go." They call it the full time. And the dad supported her so much that they sent her to Hong Kong to that seminary school because in the Philippines they said because of this Marcos regime is very, even though they have all these schools, it's very troublesome and it's very dangerous. So it's in Hong Kong where the daughter met her future husband, and later they became my parents. Okay, uh, and because of those churches and so forth, and because of the grandfather, after the graduation of my parents from seminary, the missionary, the Chinese missionaries told my grandfather, "Now you have your son-in-law being a pastor. Why don't you invite them to come over and help us?" They talk about it. So my parents went back to the Philippines to help the father-in-law
Wow.
because they have these churches together with that missionary. And from there, they started to expand the church, and it became the largest church in the Philippines that time.
Wow.
Today, it's called the United Evangelical Church of the Philippines. It's still existing, it's still there, but it's not the largest anymore due to some reasons and others. Until such time in 1978, wherein another big blow to the family because of this Marcos thing, the President Marcos thing. Uh, they realized that the Philippines may or may not be a good place after all.
Yeah.
And this daughter and her husband, my parents, decided to say, "Why don't we go to your country?" So my mother told my father, said, "Why don't we go to your country instead?" And that is Malaysia. So in 1978, they went back to Malaysia and they had to start all over again. But it's so good that it so happened that there's a church who was looking for a pastor. And there and then he helped them. And he stayed put for the next almost 30 years with that church in Malaysia. And while pastoring that church again, because of him being a mission-minded person, uh, they started several, we call it the daughter churches there in Malaysia. But in Malaysia, it's very hard to start church because it's a very strong Muslim country and it's very dangerous. No matter how dangerous, they still will go for it.
Wow.
Until such time when uh, until such time in Malaysia, because of the education purpose, they send their two children to Singapore for further education. Because that time in Malaysia, the education is really terrible. It's only in Malay and or in Chinese. So I was sent to Singapore. And after Singapore, my mother asked me, what do you want to be in life? I said, I want to be a businessman because I've seen through many things about pastors. Not only that, I've seen through how people treat the pastors, and I have comparison. I've seen through pastors being a poor pastors compared to business people. You know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
And so I decided, I said, I want to be a businessman. I don't want to be a pastors because they are poor. Not only they are poor, they don't have the final say. Not only that, they were being mistreated.
Wow.
So my mother said, if you really want to be a businessman, go back to the Philippines, and I will ask my family to help you out. That's what I did. I went back to the Philippines, one way or the other. I started at the age of 16 and a half, moving forward. After graduation, one of my uncles asked me, what do you want to be? And there and then we started a business together in such a sense until such time that I was married. I will not talk more about my history anymore, but I will jump forward to 2012. That's where we moved over to Canada. The last night when I was there, when I gave out my last car to a pastor, when I hand in the key, there is this small voice came in asking, Nathaniel, what do you have now? Everything is almost gone.
Yeah.
Because when we move over, well, we have to give many things away. We have to leave many things behind.
Wow.
And what do we have right now? If not only with 12 boxes of, with 12 luggages, that's it. And so I shed tears. I said, all these years, I've been trying to grab all those things, be it name, be it money, and so forth and so forth. What's leaving behind? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've started a few things in there. So what? And in that plane from Manila to Vancouver, again another voice came in. What's the most infallible things on earth, if not the soul? That's my answer.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I was still trying to run away until 2013, when I received a call that my mother fell and it's in danger. The doctor said at any given time, she may pass. And that really hit me hard. And but I said to myself, try to make it cool because our life is in God's hand. I know God will help everything. Until 2014, sometime in May, when I called my father, he told me, Nathaniel, it may be too late.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to visit your mom, come now, or it may be too late. And in less than a month, I had to prepare myself. I went there. I went back to Malaysia to visit my mom. And then what happened is that when I saw my mom, I was totally shocked because she couldn't recognize me. She was in hallucination. She was calling me by her brother's name, who has been with the Lord for so many years. And with me, I said, what life is all about.
Yeah.
What mom, why, with all the whys in life. But before I arrived in Malaysia that time, I prayed to the Lord, Lord, if you will prove yourself faithful to me, I will say yes to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Within 3 days, upon my arrival, within 3 days, the we call it the intelligence, the memory of my mom,
Yeah.
everything changed. She remembers everything. She recalls everything. But for the past 7 months, she was, they call it dying person. And I was even scolded by my father. I was even scolded by my relatives, my uncles and aunties. They will say, why didn't you come home earlier? Why did you let your mother suffer? Well, God proved to be faithful. And on that fall, when I came back to Calgary, promise is promise. So I entered Ambrose University
Wow.
to take up my, they call it the seminary training at Ambrose
And what year was that you did that?
in 2014.
Yeah.
2014. And not knowing what's next, because I had given myself to the Lord. So I decided not to go back to the business world. What's next? I really did not know until 2017, July, when I received a call from President Kervin. I call him, and he was telling me about this particular ministry. To be honest, I never heard of EMCC before. I don't know what EMCC is all about that time. So he had to explain everything. And I prayed about it. And when he offered it to me, I said, no, I don't want that job. Why? For me, it's going back to the business world. It's just like a business world. But one way or the other, the prompting of the Holy Spirit is getting stronger and stronger. To such an extent, I said, well, I had to surrender, no choice. Because I knew very well, like for example, a friend of mine, back in Malaysia, he knew that he has the calling, but because he did not follow the calling, some people may say it's an incident, but I said it's really the hand of God, wherein because of a lady, he decided to marry the lady. He did not go for full time, and because the lady asked him, if you want to marry me, go to the business world. If you're going to go for full time, forget about me. Why? Again, because with pastors, you don't have money.
Yeah.
With business world, you have the money.
Interesting.
And he said yes to the lady. After giving birth to their first daughter, within less than 2 years, he got the big C, I call it, cancer.
Oh, wow.
And when he came to my mother and my father being a real pastor, my father was soft with him. But my mother, being a businessman before, she was very hard with him. He told him straight, friend, it may be too late.
Yeah.
It's true, it was too late. And because of that learning of mine, if I say yes to the Lord, I have to say yes to the Lord.
Yeah. Wow.
And so with immigrants, we have our struggles. Even with my two neighbors, they have mentioned they have struggles.
Yeah.
Well, struggles are struggles, but from the struggles, we tend to lean on more to our God.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathaniel, for sharing this. Let me pause you right there, just for time's sake, too, just to transition. What I think is intriguing is how place, especially with your biography, um, is so varied. Your family And the story of your family has so many different places and histories to it. And again, you can see the difference between the rootedness, even though John has moved and he came back home to a place. In many of the other stories, you've seen this rootedness, whereas you can see the immigrant journey and the way that there's been so much immigration. A difference for me, my family came from one country and moved to another country. You've got multiple countries, and you can see the challenges of utilizing the different strengths that each of those opportunities would allow. I put here, you'll see this in the notes, that in a lot of ways, one of the summaries is it's a journey from poverty to wealth. And then what happens once wealth comes? You can hear that in so many of the stories. Wealth comes, it is not always the full blessing that it was expected to be, and there are challenges, where ultimately there's this: will we serve God, who was the giver of the wealth, or will we end up serving mammon, itself, and greed setting in? I think it's interesting how the strength and the resilience of being able to start over again and again and again is something that you carry and has been in your family DNA for so long. Like, there is not a lack, there is less fear around starting over, but the wealth is part of that. Even in your own story, part of the thing that, your wrestling match with God and the surrender ultimately that you've let out. I also think it's interesting that the Lord has led you to a place where your strengths in business are now a blessing in the church world, and the church is being blessed from your business acumen, and how that allows you to live into a tension that has been a part of your story for a long time. Will I choose one or the other? And now, through obedience, you've been brought into a place where both of those are getting to be employed in what you do. And you're in the church world, and you're also leaned into with all the strengths of your business skill sets there. So very intriguing. I wish we had a little bit more time to unpack some of that, but I think back to the way that you started. I live in Calgary. There are 1 million people. 80% of them are immigrants who are here. And I lived an immigrant story. And though your story is going to be different than others, there are similarities that immigrants will share compared to non-immigrant families. And that's a bridge that you can lean into. You can understand an immigrant story, whether they immigrated from places you did or whether they immigrated from other places, simply because these are things that immigrants are going to face, even though these are particular to your own story and your own life. Nathaniel, do you have any other key kairos maybe that struck you? Because I think I've heard parts of this story, and I think I can now even understand in a more holistic way about that journey that the Lord's been calling you into. Are there any other key kairos that struck you as you worked through this?
Yep. The key kairos is knowing my own parents as PK,
Yeah.
and then looking towards our own EMCC pastors. The kairos is it's been here for almost 2.5 years now. How can I help more the pastors, especially with the older pastors wherein they're facing their retirement?
Great. And what's interesting again is that you can serve in a business sense and in a pastoral sense because of what you carry. That's great. Thanks, Nathaniel, for sharing this with us. All right, friends, we'll wrap up there. What we'll do is, I think I've skipped moving into the character and skills questions and put us next week into the next phase of some chapter work. You'll see that from the email that went out. Nathaniel, I did note the change. I think I had just written down the wrong date, so I'll go back and try to fix that for that date that you had identified. But we'll move into the next content from here. And if I remember correctly, I think we go into the hero's journey is the next leg that we're going to be working into. All right. All right. Bless you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks for sharing.